Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. welcome. So I've been meaning to do this video for a while, and what we're going to be talking about today is something very simple. It's different ways that you can potentially play Diablo 2 Resurrected, by which using it's considered a self-imposed rule set. So self-imposed rule sets are things that are very specific to like how you progress through the game. Now, obviously, there's the standard ways that everybody plays, such as offline, single player, and online multiplayer. And those are, of course, two ways that you can potentially play the game. And those are not self-imposed rule sets. So those are just simply um, just how you play the game normally. Anything online versus offline also changes when it comes to self-imposed rule sets. Like, for instance, there is a self-imposed rule set that exists online, but it only exists online. It doesn't really exist offline because offline it's just known as single player. And we're going to be going over these one by one, and we're going to talk about the various different game modes that you can potentially, take part in. And we're also going to like verify the rules of these particular sets. So I'm going to bring up two notepads here. And we are actually going to do two separate notepads. So first off, solo self-found is the first game mode that we're going to talk about. Solo self-found is basically a self-imposed rule set that is usually designed around the idea of you have to find everything yourself. And I might even be able to save myself a little bit of time here because I'm pretty sure I have one already saved from my previous solo self-found runs. Let's see. Rules. Where are my rules? Of course, I never named them anything important. Half the time when I save stuff in here, it's like ASDF 992244317856, which is not helpful when I'm trying to go back and pull up previous, dojanks. But I actually found it. Look at me. I actually named it properly. So SSF P8 rules. So these are my rules specifically. So these are self-imposed rules. And I think that's the most important thing to like talk about here with these is that when it comes to rule sets, they are self-imposed. And obviously they change depending on you. So obviously you can change these rules, but the important thing is that you stand by whatever rules that you are trying to make. And also make sure that you're following the distinctions, because if you go online and you tell people that you're on solo self-found and you're not on solo self-found, if you're in fact doing solo account found, and then they find out later that, you're not like following the basic tenets of what makes solo self-found, like an actual thing, then, they're going to make fun of you because, well, solo self-found and solo account found are two different things. And we'll cover the differences between those as well. But let's cover solo self-found first. So, number one, and this is my specific rule that has to do with players 8 locking, and we'll talk more about this later. So we're going to skip this rule for right now. You cannot use any item from any other character at all. Now, what this means is that, say for instance, and we're going to look over here, in my offline account, let's say I find something really sweet on my Zeal Barbarian, and it happens to be like an Astrion's Iron Ward, and I'd really like to give that Astrion's Iron Ward to my Paladin. I cannot do that under the solo self-found rules. Solo self-found basically requires that your character finds all the equipment themselves, which means they actually have to see a drop. Now, there are some distinction in the rule sets when it comes to online versus offline. Now, offline, you don't really need to make any distinctions because the thing is that, well, you can't really trade with anybody offline anyway. But on rule number 3, you see trading is off limits because you can only use and find items that you basically find yourself. If you're online, you have to see it fall on the ground. That's generally the rule when it comes to online. Like, just being in the game is not enough. You have to actually see it fall. If you see it fall, then that's fine. And in fact, you can trade with somebody if you saw it fall, because at that point you were present when it fell. You did find it on that character, even though it went to another person. You were too slow to grab it. So in that particular situation, that is the only particular situation where you could potentially trade with another player. So like, let me add in an addendum here. If you do see it fall, but do not like how do we try to do this? Win the grab. That's what we'll say, but do not win the grab. You could trade for that specific item from that player. This is a kind of like an addendum that has to do with the fact that, like, you saw it fall. Obviously, you found it on that particular character. You just didn't win the grab. So in that particular case, you do have the ability to trade with this particular person for this particular item because it still counts as a self-found item. Number 4, this is a rule that I add myself, so this is more of a secondary rule with solo self-found. So there's 2 different kinds of solo self-found. There is solo self-found, which is the normal way you do solo self-found, which is basically where you can change the difficulty at any time, and you can target farm items. So, like, for instance, let's say I wanted to get myself a gold dagger. I could either A, gamble a gold dagger, or I could B, go farm cold crow, right? And I could do this repeatedly, over and over again, until I get my specific item that I'm looking for, right? This is what I mean by target farming, all right? So when it comes to this specific rule, this is called the live off the land rule, and live off the land rule has been around for a long time. Living off the land basically means that you cannot specifically target farm pieces of equipment. This means something as simple as farming the Countess for the runes for stealth is off limits. This means that going to a very specific place to get a very specific item, like, for instance, let's say you're looking for mage fists, and you look up on Silo's pen and it says that, like, normal Diablo is the best place to farm mage fists, and then you spend the next like 5 hours farming Diablo until you get mage fists. Like, that would be off limits with a live off the land rule. Living off the land is a specific rule that is going to prevent you from doing that. You can use whatever you find. And if you happen to find a pair of mage fists randomly as you're playing, then that's perfectly acceptable. But you can't specifically go out of your way to farm a specific piece of equipment to make your run easier, I guess, is what I'm talking about. This rule is really meant to give you a feeling of like almost MacGyver, essentially, right? And you can see right down here, target farming is when you farm a target until it drops the item that you are looking for specifically. This is the MacGyver rule, and essentially what this means is that you have to make do with what you have in your equipment. Like, if you don't have a pair of mage fists, then you find something else that goes into that spot that you can work with. A lot of the times when it comes to farming specific monsters, instead of farming a specific monster until they drop a specific item, you can farm a monster until they drop something that fills that particular slot. Like, for instance, if you just need a pair of gloves and you farm Andy like 20 times and she drops you a pair of gloves, well, then you've achieved your goal of getting a pair of gloves, but you didn't get like a specific item, and that's fine. It's kind of a janky rule, but the really cool thing is that if you follow it, it does make the run significantly more difficult, and it also makes the run significantly more fun because you have to get more ingenious. You have to get more, like MacGyvery, essentially, with your playthrough to actually succeed, because if you don't, well, you'll end up failing. So you end up using whatever you have at your disposal. And this rule is actually really cool because what it does is it causes you to use items that you may not have never even considered using before. Things that you may have considered to be trash before. You will realize that there are a lot of items in the game that have a very effective usefulness when you don't have the easy options, at your fingertips, which is what this rule prevents. The solo self-found run is generally over after killing Hell Bale. So I pretty much put this rule in here, and this has to do with kind of like finding a finality for the run. Of course, you could put your own solo self-found ending on here, or you could say that the solo self-found run never ends, and you could just spend a very long time farming to get all the equipment that you need for the character. The interesting thing about the solo self-found runs is that their goal is to try and simulate a harder playthrough for veteran players, is what they are. So it's really just a harder playthrough for veterans. And the solo self-found no target farming specific gear, or the live off the land rule, is just an even harder it's a playthrough for veterans. And this is definitely a very interesting one in my opinion. I prefer the live off the land rule. I think the coolest thing about the live off the land rule is it simulates very similarly a new character, like a new person who's playing through the game. Like imagine when you first played the game. The first time that you picked up Diablo 2, you were like putting two-handed swords on your necromancer, you know, you were running around slapping stuff with your sorceress, like you didn't really understand how to play. You didn't know that the Countess would drop you runes. You didn't know that you could get mage fists from Diablo. You didn't know that you could go farm Andy until she gave you everything that you wanted. So even though we can't obviously remove this information from our heads as veterans, we can, however, give ourselves a strict self-imposed rule set to try and help prevent us from, you know, like exploiting that knowledge. So by locking yourself into the no target farming or live off the land rule, which I highly recommend with solo self-found, you're basically just going to give yourself an even more fun playthrough, where you're going to have to like use every bit of knowledge that you have to succeed. That pretty much covers solo self-found. Solo self-found is a very neat rule set to set, and I want to go on to the player's lock. In fact, let's move this up because we'll cover solo account found next. The player's lock is an interesting rule that I came up with. I don't know if anybody else was doing it before me. But basically, I just wanted more of a challenge. Players 1, so if you're unfamiliar with Diablo 2, the difficulties in the game change depending on the number of players within the game. Or if you're offline, as an example, and you enter a game and you type in slave players 8, you can change the difficulty to players 8. In this game mode, you can also do this down here, so you can change the difficulty to various player counts. Player counts obviously exist between 1 and 8, with the difficulties spiking, obviously, at specific tiers. But if you lock at players 8, this means that you cannot change it from players 8 at any time. And the important thing is that with a player lock, and it's kind of like the whole thing, right? So if you don't have a player's count lock, you can change the player count at any point in a run. Like, say, for instance, I was doing a run and I wanted to get some more EXP, I could bump it up to players 8 and I could try and get more EXP. Or if I found that a fight was too difficult for me, I could bring it down to players 1 and I could manipulate the difficulty, you know, like at my leisure to exploit a better, you know, gameplay, right? So like I'm adjusting the difficulty of the game to match what my character is currently capable of, and if I get more equipment, I can bump it up, and if I suddenly find myself, you know, like getting into a harder area, I could bring it down, and so forth and so on, and I can manipulate this at my will. It also affects things like the Countess. The Countess, for instance, drops better gear in players 1, or better runes in players 1, and better gear in players 8, but crappy runes in players 8. So this is also something else that is affected by the player count. So locking yourself to players 8, as an example, or even any player count that you want to, of course you can lock yourself to whatever player count you want. This is also going to increase the difficulty for your playthrough. It's definitely going to make one of those things where you're going to get a lot more difficult run because you realize that you're going to get stuck in situations where those player 8 monsters are just above you, and you're going to have to farm lower areas until you get enough equipment that you can potentially, you know, like work your way forward, which is really nice. Most of the solo self-found runs that I do have actually been solo self-found live off the land players 8, which is essentially one of the hardest modes that you can potentially play in.
Mr. Goody Two Shoes, Mr. Goody Two Shoes. Ginger Evil Mentor here. Why bother farming when you can go to MMOEXP.com and simply purchase your items in gold? GGM would have you farm the items. What a pathetic being. Use code GEM Ginger Evil Mentor for 6% off your entire purchase. And don't tell Ginger Gaming Mentor that I was here.
Next is solo account found. And for this, I'm actually going to bring up Last Epoch. I like to point out that these modes are, in fact, normalized in a lot of games. So this is not just something that a lot of people have made up, although they were originally rules that were made up. Even games like Last Epoch have normalized these rule sets in a way that has made them, kind of like almost standardized across the gaming world. And if you pull up Last Epoch, for instance, and you go to create a character, you will find options specifically tailored toward exactly what I'm talking about. And let me see if I can show you what these options are. It's been a little while since I booted up Last Epoch, so it's probably going to throw me a fit. Harbingers of Ruin. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new character. And when you create a new character, it doesn't really matter which one you create. And we're just going to go ahead and just make a regular character here. You'll notice on the side here, there are challenges. See the challenges, and we have solo account found. This character will not be able to party with nor obtain items found by other players, but shares the same stash and materials with your other solo account found characters within the same game mode and cycle. This is probably the simplest way to explain it that you can possibly explain it. Solo account found is essentially just single player. It is essentially an entire account with multiple characters that have access to a shared stash, and that shared stash is, of course, filled with items that all the characters on that account can utilize. The only restrictions, really, for a solo account found character is that you cannot trade or obtain items from other characters. So you will not be able to get anything from other characters at all in terms of trading or like picking up items off the ground for that somebody else dropped for you. Now, I would say, and I don't think that it works with this way, but if in the same way that I consider trading with someone that you found an item dropped on the ground, so obviously you're both standing there, you kill a monster, an item falls on the ground, and obviously he picks it up instead of you. That is probably one of the only scenarios where I would consider that to be allowed in terms of solo account found. Because obviously you were there when the item fell. However, game modes like this usually don't take that into account. So you would probably be locked out of the item for trading on online platforms that actually have these types of modes. As you can see, solo character found is also here, which is basically solo self found. So this character will not be able to party with nor obtain items found by other players. This includes items you find on other solo character found characters, even if they share the same game mode and cycle. So a solo self found character, just as I explained earlier, cannot trade items with any other characters, including your own account, which means that they do not have access to your shared stash, essentially, of massive, amounts of loot from other characters. Now, I have actually kind of like come around to another idea on this, which is something that I didn't originally think about. And this has to do with go ahead and close this. This has to do with solo self-found mules. So I didn't originally consider the idea of solo self-found mules, but I do consider solo self-found mules to be a thing. So I'm going to write this in here. Solo self-found mules are allowed. Now, what do I mean by a solo self-found mule? A solo self-found mule is essentially a mule that was created specifically for equipment that you found on your solo self-found character. This is really just a way to give you more stash space so that you can accumulate equipment on your solo self-found character. You can't obviously load these mules with equipment from any other character, and obviously you cannot use the mules to farm equipment. So the mules are literally just there as an extension of your inventory space and nothing else. And that's fine. Having an extension of your inventory space on a solo self-found character is absolutely fine. The only thing that would be, obviously opposed to that is if you start loading items onto the mules that you did not find specifically. It just gives you a way to expand your inventory space on your solo self-found character, and I think that's okay. You don't have to do it, but in my time playing through my solo self-found runs, I kind of, like after a while, I started to fill up my stash and I had to, like prioritize certain items over others. And it would have been nice if I could have held on to certain pieces of equipment that I might have needed later on instead of ditching them because I needed inventory space. You kind of get my point. So far we've covered solo self-found. We've covered solo self-found with the live off the land rule. We've also covered the players count lock. Now, the players count lock is extremely difficult when you get into higher content. I've actually done several runs, and I feel like this is a good time to plug some of my other runs in terms of my solo self-found. So let me pull up my playlists here, and I'm going to type in SSF. And here is my playlist right now. I have currently one playlist for every character. I've got solo self-found P8 Assassin, solo self-found P8 Amazon, Paladin, solo self-found P8, Barbarian, solo self-found P8, Druid, Sorceress, and Necromancer. The Paladin run was actually a lot longer than the others because I didn't stop at Bale. I actually took the solo self-found run all the way to Ubers. So I did Players 8 Ubers solo self-found, which was quite a challenge. Let me tell you what, I had to scrape together pieces of equipment all across the game and like cobble together a character that could potentially manage to kill the Ubers. And I think I can click on the videos here. If you're interested in looking at any of these runs, all these playlists are up, and I'll actually link them all in the description of the video for you guys if you want to like go over them and kind of see like how I did my solo self-found runs. This video right here is where I actually killed the Ubers, by the way. Episode 5. That was a scary run, to say the least. I might put this to the side for later so I can put that in the comments. Now, on top of this, on top of all these self-imposed rules, another self-imposed rule that is actually built within Diablo 2 is, of course, the hardcore mode. Hardcore mode means that you can only die once. And, of course, this is something that you would toggle at the beginning of creating your character. So as you can see, if I wanted to make a hardcore paladin, and that would be definitely pretty rough. Now, this is, of course, can be combined with any of the above modes. You can make a hardcore solo self-found character. You can make a hardcore solo self-found live off the land rule character. You could also make a hardcore player count lock character, which basically means that you are going to obviously lock that to P8. So one of the hardest like modes that you can potentially do, like for instance, would be like solo self-found live off the land plus like P8 and then plus hardcore, which would be probably one of the hardest difficulty modes that you could probably participate in, because not only are you restricting yourself, obviously, to, like only the equipment that you could find, you're also restricting yourself from target farming specific pieces of equipment that would make your farming, your whole life easier. You're also locking it at the hardest difficulty setting and saying, hey, if I die one time, that's it, it's over. So one of the hardest difficulties that you can possibly ever run, unless you start adding in challenges. Now, me specifically, I'm not a big hardcore player, if I'm being perfectly honest. I got too many distractions in my life, and hardcore is just a little bit too hardcore for me. Cody, like, literally comes up behind me and licks the back of my leg half the time, or, like, nudges my arm and gets me killed, or I can't even explain the number of distractions I have on a really regular basis. And I know it sounds like excuses, but like if you watch my live streams, you'll see I die all the time. So, and every time I die, I'm like, see, this is why I don't play hardcore. So the next thing that you could potentially add on top of all this to make it even more difficult is challenge runs. Now, challenge runs are usually something very specific. Like, for instance, you can challenge yourself to a fists-only barb run, or you can do a two-handed paladin run. You can challenge yourself to no rune words or only uniques. Only rune words, like instead of no rune words, you can do only rune words, or no uniques. Only rune words is difficult for other reasons because, of course, you can't have rune words in every slot. There's no rune word amulet. There's no rune word rings or belts or boots or gloves, right? So you're pretty much just stuck with most of your equipment slots empty. No uniques, obviously, is an interesting one. Only rares, only blues, and there's really no limit to how many different, like challenge modes that you can potentially do, like bow necro, or you could potentially do a whole challenge mode where you're like a bow paladin. You could do like a no sunder run. You could do, I'm trying to think, like 1,000 different runs. You could do like a melee sorceress, melee sorc. You could also do potentially like a golem only run. I mean, there's like tons of different potentially like challenge modes that you could activate to make, obviously your playthrough even more difficult by like tying your own hands in a certain way. And some people will say that this is just masochistic. Like a lot of this stuff is just punishing yourself in very difficult ways. And I don't necessarily agree. I think that a lot of this stuff can be extremely fun because it is like a puzzle that you have to solve. It is essentially like, like taking your knowledge and testing your knowledge and seeing how good you are at figuring out the game, even when, you have specific rules tying your hands in specific ways. Like when you have players 8 locked, or when you have, like the live off the land rule, like being able to be sufficient off of just the items that you find instead of having, like farming specific pieces of equipment that you need. Um, Even solo account found can be very difficult if you play online. For instance, a solo account found is specifically for online mode because obviously all single player accounts are solo accounts found anyway. So if you're playing a single player account on Diablo 2 Resurrected, you're solo account found. But when you're online, this means that you're not going to be able to trade with anybody, which means that you're going to have a disadvantage over other players. You won't be able to share equipment with your friends. You won't be able to trade items. You're basically just locked to what you find yourself on a solo account found online playthrough. And this definitely becomes a lot more difficult, you will find, when you cannot trade for items. Like, for instance, you want to make an infinity? Well, now you have to find 2 burr runes. That's not going to be easy. You want to make yourself, something really fancy, or you want to like find an Astrion's Iron Ward? Well, you've got to actually find it. Finding Astrion's Iron Ward is actually pretty difficult. When you're online, somebody always finds one, and you can potentially trade for it. But the problem is that when you're doing a solo account found, you can't trade. You can't have it gifted to you. So you have to find it yourself, and finding it yourself is not really that easy. Some of these items are exceedingly rare, like Astrion's Iron Ward, Mangsong's Lesson, Tyrael's Might, etc., which is like a whole nother thing. Another potential game mode that you can add on to this is not really a game mode so much as a way of tracking, like, have you found all the items? A solo self found Holy Grail is an interesting thing. And of course, Holy Grails can be tacked onto any game modes. You can potentially have any type of game mode added onto this, and you can add the Holy Grail as a option. There are Holy Grail trackers, and for those of you who don't know what the Holy Grail is, there are tons of Holy Grail trackers out there. I have used, I'm trying to think here, there's a couple of them. There's one on Maxroll. There's one on like holygrail.link. I mean, there's a couple of them on here, whichever one that you want to use. It really doesn't matter all that much which one you use. Of course, you can potentially grab any of them. What is a Holy Grail? It is finding all of the items in the game. I was pretty sure I have a Holy Grail on here, but let me check real quick. Yes, I'm using Hero app. This is it right here. So this is the one that I'm using at the moment for my Holy Grail. This is d2-holy-grail.herokuapp.com. And this one in particular, as you can see, I've already marked out a lot of my pieces of equipment that I found. I did find a steel rend. Um, And I have not found the Spirit Ward. I think that's actually one of the last items I need to actually finish this off. I have found everything. I even found an Astrions. I did find a Grandfather this season, and I did find a Death's Web this season. Um, Ravenlore, I did find a Ravenlore. So the only item that I'm actually missing right now on my Holy Grail is the Spirit Ward. I have never found one of these. It is really quite sad. I don't know why I have never found a Spirit Ward. They just do not drop for me. And you can even take this a step further. So not only can you do, obviously, a Holy Grail, but you can also do an Ethereal Holy Grail is another option as well, and it's something that some people do. Um, and then on top of this, some people include gems, runes, and basically like everything. Like there are definitely some holy grails that include like everything within the mix. Having the runes in there makes it extremely difficult because, of course, that means you have to actually find a Zod rune. You have to find a Burr rune. You got to find a Jaw. You got to find a Cham, etc., which definitely is going to take you a long time. These holy grails can be tacked onto any game mode, obviously, including when you don't have any self-imposed rules on there. And some of the holy grails require that you keep every single item, so you have to mule them off. Some of the holy grails just require that you like grab a screenshot of it or something. Like hey, I found this, and then you like take a screenshot of it. The beauty of doing the Holy Grail offline is that you can, of course, have all of those items, like stored away on mules, and you can potentially keep everything so that you have it as a record of all the items that you potentially are using. However, if you do this online, it's going to be exceedingly difficult, obviously, to maintain all the items, which is a problem. I mean, some of the items are so easy to find that you could probably just get rid of them anyway. But it is a game mode that you can potentially do. I hope this has been a little bit of eye-opening for some of you guys. I will put the links for my solo self-found runs down in the description for you guys to check out. If you want to do your own self-imposed rule set, one thing that I would recommend that you do to start out with is just open yourself up a notepad and write down the rules that you want to follow for your specific run. And, don't change them. Keep the rules the same, basically all run long. If somebody asks you what your rules are, that way you'll have them and you can send them your rules and they'll know exactly what rules you're following, when you're talking to them about specific ways that you want to build your characters or trying to get, the Ubers killed or something like that. Like maybe you're on a solo self-found, like P8 Amazon and you're trying to figure out how to kill the Ubers with like a rock, a twig, a rubber band, and a staple, and like the MacGyver rule. And this will, obviously help you out tremendously because, you're going to be able to like even share your, like your rules. And so they'll know exactly what, you're working with. And it takes some time. It's definitely a fun playthrough. A lot of my playthroughs have been extremely fun. Some of them have been really lucky. Like on my barbarian, I was able to create a I was able to create a grief. All of my solo self-found runs, I believe, are in my item pack. By the way, if you download it, I think that's pretty much it for today's video. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, and be sure to hit that like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. I do have some more Diablo 2 content coming eventually, and as always, keep watching.